We are coming to the last session of our webinars of ABR, Advanced Business Reporting. The most important part in your paper, SLFR is 16 leases, and this is the long awaited topic for the discussion. SLFR is 16 leases, and this is replacing LK 17, the previous version of leases, plus IFRIC FU, whether an arrangement contains a lease. So, those two are replaced by SLFR 16 now, and this is one of the heaviest standard in our curriculum. But what I am going to discuss today within just 3 hours time will be just a small speck of dust on your feet if the standard will be compared to a mountain. So, but this is enough for the exam, but for the practice you need to learn more, you need to dive into the small nooks and corners of the standard. And before I start my discussions on the technical areas, I just want to take your attention to a small area. You know, you learn the conceptual framework. Under the conceptual framework, we learn the definition of an asset. So, can you remember the definition of an asset? An asset is an economic resource which the entity controls and arising as a result of a past event. Economic resource controlled by the entity. And this is this is what I want you to look at basically. An asset is an economic resource controlled by the entity. Now, when you have the control over an asset, you can take any decisions regarding the asset. If you want to say, we will think of a building, and if you want to use the building for your office, you can decide to run your office within the building. If you want to run the showroom in the building, you can decide to do that and you can do it. I mean, you can decide that and you can do it. And if you want to use the building for the showroom or even the factory, you can do it. If you want to use the building of your business as a mortuary, even you can do it. And if you want to use the building as your residence, you can do it. If you want to decide to remove the roof of the building, you can do that. If you decide to demolish the building, ruin that to the ground, still you can do it. If you want to change the design of the building, you can do it. If you want to set the building fire and to burn that into ashes and char it into coal, you can still do that. What can you do when you have the control? Then if you have the control of yourself, you can control your emotions and you can control your attitudes, and you decide to grow your hair, you can do it. I want myself to be bald headed, so I can cut off my hair, and I decide not to brush my teeth, I can do that. And I decide to jump up to the highest point in the world and jump off and commit suicide to let my body break into pieces, I can still do that. Why? I have the control over myself, and if you have the control over the asset, you can do any damn thing for the asset. Why? You have the control over the asset. Now, you get the control of the asset. You get the control of the asset. If you get the control of the asset, that is an asset purchase. An asset purchase. How do we confirm that I have purchased an asset? The asset is no one else's, it's mine now, because I have received the control. So, you can do any damn thing for the asset if you have really genuinely purchased the asset. But if you get only the control of the use of the asset, there is a massive difference. You haven't received the control of the asset itself, but you have received the control of the use of the asset. So, how do we differentiate receiving the control of the use of the asset from the control of the asset itself? Now, say two buildings. Here I have received the control of the asset. Here I have received the control of the use of the asset. Here I will decide to open up the building at 7 o'clock in the morning, because I have received the control of the asset. Building B, I haven't received the control of the asset, but I have received the control of the use of the asset. I can decide to open up the building in the morning at 7 o'clock. I can decide to shut the building down in the evening at 6 o'clock. Also here building B, I can decide to shut the building off at 6 o'clock in the evening. I will decide to change the color of the building A because I have received the control of the building itself. Here I can't decide to change the color of the building B because I haven't received the control of the asset. I have received only the control of the use of the asset. Here building A, I will decide to remove the roof of the building to get more natural ventilation. I can do it because I have received the control of the asset. I will decide to remove the roof of the building B to get the natural ventilation more and more. Though I decide, I can't do it because I have received only the control of use of the asset, not the control of the asset. I will decide to use the building A for a mortuary. I can do it because I have received the control of the asset plus control of the use of the asset A. I will decide to use the building B for a mortuary. I can do it because I have received the control of use of the asset. I will decide to demolish the building and ruin down to the ground. I can do it because I have received the control of the asset plus the control of the use of the asset. Even if I decide to demolish the building and ruin that to the ground of building B, I can't do it. Why? Because I have received only the control of the use of the asset, not the control of the building. So then, here I can decide only in relation to the use of the asset. Here building A, I can not only decide what the building can be used for, also I can decide anything in relation to the asset A, because here when you get the control of the asset, you get the control of the asset as well as the control over the use of the asset. Here when you get control over the use of the asset, you can control only the use, not the asset. So this is not an asset purchase, not an asset purchase, not an asset purchase. There is another instance where you neither get control of the asset itself, nor you get control of the use of the asset, but still you use it, use the asset, still we use the asset. How come? So I will buy a vehicle on my own. I will buy a vehicle on my own, the vehicle is mine now, so I can decide anything in relation to the vehicle. I will decide to remove the engine, I can do that. I will decide to remove the 4 wheels, I can do that. I will decide to remove the engine, I can decide that. I will set fire and burn that into ashes, I can still do that. I have the control over the asset. I will take a vehicle on a lease agreement. I can decide where to drive the vehicle. I can decide where the vehicle should be driven from. I can decide how many passengers to be taken. I can decide where to stop. I can decide only over the control of the use of the asset, but I can't decide to change the color of the vehicle. I can't decide to set it fire and to burn that into ashes. I can't decide to change the engine of the vehicle. I can't decide to remove the 4 wheels of the vehicle. Why? Since I get a vehicle on a lease agreement, I get the control only over the use of the asset, not over the asset. But sometimes you use the vehicle, you neither get the control of the asset itself, nor you get the control over the use of the asset. Say it is a bus which is operating on the road, starting from Piliandala right up to Peta. You get into the bus. Can you decide where the bus should start from? You can't decide. Can you decide where the bus should stop at? You can't decide. Can you decide where the bus should be heading to? You can't decide. Can you decide how many passengers to be taken in? You can't decide. Can you decide which passengers to be taken? You can't decide. So you have no control over the asset itself, neither have you the control over the use of the asset, but still you are using the asset, then that is receiving a service. Receiving a service. Right. And it can be a transaction where you receive the control over the asset, and that is an asset purchase. You can apply either LKS 2, LKS 16 or LKS 40 or LKS 38, whatever. And if it is a transaction where you receive the control of the use of the asset, and that is a lease agreement, and that is what SLFR 16 applies for. And if you retain the right of controlling the asset, and you retain the control of the use of the asset also, but still you let someone else to use your vehicle asset, then that is like you providing a service to another party. That is where SLFR 15 applies. So see, just a single letter, single word in a definition can make a vast, massive difference. So depending on the control of what has been acquired, either you can apply LKS 16 or you can apply LKS 40, or it can be even LKS 2, it can be LKS 38, depending on whether you acquired the control over the asset. If you acquired only the control over the use of the asset, that is what SLFR 16 should apply for. And if you retain the control of the asset plus the control over the use of the asset, but still you let someone else to use your asset, that is where you provide a service, and that is what SLFR 15 applies for. That is a service rendering transactions. I hope things are clear, and that is very important to define what a lease is. So we will move on. Definition of a lease. A contract is or contains a lease if the contract conveys the right to control the use of an identified asset for a period of time in exchange for a consideration. So there are some important words in the definition. It is a contract that conveys the right to control, it's not the asset. It is not a contract that conveys the right to control an asset, no. So, what does this contract convey? This contract conveys the right to control the use of not just an asset, identified asset for a specific period and for a consideration. So, then there are important ingredients for there to be a lease contract, lease transaction. Let us see what those basic ingredients. As you can see for yourself, it has to be an identified asset. to understand the balance part of SLFR is 16. This is very important. If you fail this part, the entire part will be hell of a mess. And basic two ingredients are what? You must make sure that in the agreement always the asset is identified, specifically identified, and we will go into details. I will take as many examples as possible for your convenience to impress how a lease can be identified, and this is not like you defining a lease agreement in the previous LK 70. Then the other important ingredient in a lease contract is to having the right to control the use of the asset. And for this asset to be identified in the lease contract, you must make sure that no substantive substitution right, substantive, and we heard that concept in the previous standard SLFR is 10, substantive, exercisable substitution rights. What does it say? The lessor, the owner of the asset, has the right of replacing the asset, leased assets, with another one. Let us see with couple of examples how that works in our definitions and the discussions. No benefits from substitution. Then right to control the use of the asset, right to obtain substantially all economic benefits, and this is bit of a contentious area, so we need to go into more details. Right to direct the use of the asset. How do we know that? You should question yourself as to how and for what purpose the asset can be used. Now, so no matter of repeating this over and over again and you won't get anything, and to impress this definition or to impress on how a lease can be identified, so you need to practice with more and more examples, and then only you will get familiar with this. So let me start with some simple and basic examples, and then we'll advance and progress towards more complicated and commercial examples as well. Now, sometimes back in my school days, I can remember the manager of a CTB bus depot being used to send us a bus for the school boys to our college, and sometimes there was a particular agreement between the principal of our school and the manager of Gold Bus Depot to send a bus early in the morning to our college. Sometimes he used to send 23-3-8561, that was the number of the bus. Then he used to send us GQ 8844. So different buses on different days. Even though there is a contract between the principal of the school and the manager of the bus depot to send a bus, nowhere does that agreement say which bus has to be sent. Anything, any bus, any vehicle that he thinks is all right for the school will be sent every day. So, as a result, that particular agreement does not seem to contain a lease. Why? Because the manager of the Gold Bus Depot had the right to substitute the vehicle. If he wants to send a newly purchased bus, he used to send. If he wants to send the oldest ever in the depot, that is what he used to send. He was always keeping the right of substituting the vehicle. Then, what happens is, since the vehicle in the contract, in the agreement is not identified specifically, that particular contract does not include a lease. A simple example. Now say, later on, for the convenience of the students, and then even we know, 5 kilometers away, when we hear the sound of coming the bus, we identify what the bus is, because now the manager does not send any bus that he wants, and there is a specifically identified bus which is painted with the colors of black and yellow and with the logo of the college. Now, he is sending the vehicle. The moment we see this logo, we know that is our bus. So, this particular bus cannot be run on the road, and this bus cannot be sent into another school, and this bus can be sent only to our school. Why? It is painted with the unique colors that belongs to our school, also painted with the logo of the school. Now, in the contract or the arrangement, just a verbal arrangement, you need not to have a written contract sometimes. This particular arrangement is very likely of including a lease, because now the asset is specifically identified. So, that alone is not enough. Right to control the use of the asset. None of us ever drove the bus, but we know it is we who decide where the bus should start from. It is we who decide where the bus should stop at. It is we who decide whom should be taken into the bus and whom should not be taken into the bus. And it is we who decide where the bus should be heading to. It is we who decide how fast the bus should be driven. It is we who decide how slowly the bus should be driven. It is we who decide whether the bus should be stopped at the school or should be stopped in front of another school. So, it is we who decided every damn thing, everything in relation to the control of the use of the asset, not the asset. You can't change the color of the vehicle, no. Here, as a result, we are retaining the right to control the use of the asset. And then let us look at the other subcomponents later. This particular contract seems to contain a lease. Why? Because the basic two requirements are satisfied. So, what are the basic two requirements? First and foremost, you need to look at whether the assets are specifically identified in the arrangement of the contract, and you must see whether you have the right to control the use of the asset. Then no problem, we will come to the conclusions that the arrangement of the contract contains a lease. So, we will get into the subcomponents. No substantive substitution rights, no benefits from substitution, rights to obtain substantially all economic benefits, right to direct the use of the assets. Let us take some examples with the subcomponents to impress more and more on how a lease agreement can be identified. Now, say we take a small space in the airport to run a small kiosk, a small shop. Just imagine we paying 200,000 rupee rental to the authority for allowing us to use this space to run our shop. Now, this particular area is specifically identified and it is reserved for us to run our business, identified asset. And it is we who decide when we should open up the business in the morning and when we should close down the business, or shut down the shop in the evening. And it is we who decide what goods to be sold, what price the goods should be sold at. It is we who decide how many employees to be recruited and to keep in the shops at any given time. So, all the decisions in relation to the use of the assets were taken by us. Now, the authority of the airport had entered a small clause in the agreement saying that if another party is asking the same space for a higher rental. Higher rental, we are paying just 200,000 rupees, but if someone is asking the same place for 300,000 rupees, the authority of the airport has retained the right of giving us another place and to give this place to another party who can afford to pay a higher rental. What does it say? As per the terms and the conditions in the contract, the owner of the asset has retained the right, what right? Substantive substitution right. We will forget about the word substantive for the moment. Substitution right. So, whenever somebody comes and says, look here, give us the place, we will pay you 300,000 rupees, we will be pulled out to the corner of the airport and that place will be given to another party. Then again we get it back. Then again someone else will come and say, look here, we are going to give you 500,000 rupees, give us the place, we will be thrown aside and that place will be given to another party. So, always we keep moving around the airport, even including the canteen, even including the vehicle park, and we do not have a specific place. Why? If the substitution right is retained by the owner, that undermines the right of the asset being specifically identified in the contract. And some people see us in the canteen sometimes, some people see us in the vehicle park sometimes they see us at the lobby area sometimes they see us on the top of the roof. Why? When somebody comes and pays a higher rental, they start throwing us to the corner of the airport and then the place will be given to another party. The entity, the owner of the asset is retaining the substitution right. Why? He gets an economic benefit, economic concession. Substantive, substitution right is there, but it has to be substantive. Whether it is exercisable or not should be decided based on your judgment. Now, we have set our equipment here and we have settled down there permanently. If the authority of the airport is going to give us another place, they have to set our equipment at the new place and they need to make us settle down there. That is going to be expensive. Even when the airport will get 300,000 rupees rental for the space, if the setting up cost is very high, then the airport exercising this substitution right is likely or unlikely? It is unlikely. Then what is it? There is a substitution right which is not substantive. Another simple example, we are exporting fruits and vegetables to foreign countries. To do this exporting, there has to be a special craft set specifically for this purpose. You know, the way the fruits and the vegetables are transported, they should be exported with meticulous carefulness. So, the Sri Lankan Airlines has reserved a special aircraft with special interior constructions in a way that the vegetables and the fruits can be exported with safety, with minimal damages. And Sri Lankan Airlines says at any given time, the aircraft that is reserved for our purpose can be replaced. So, the owner of the asset has retained the right of substitution. But then again you need to see whether the substitution right is substantive, meaning whether it is exercisable. And for this aircraft to be replaced with another aircraft, they need to do that, redo that interior work in a way that the vegetables and the fruits can be exported, and that interior constructions, arrangements and the settings will be so expensive and no point of doing that over and over again. So, the owner of the asset exercising the substantive, the owner of the asset exercising the substitution right is likely, unlikely, and then the substitution rights are not substantive, meaning asset will get replaced over and over again or will not get replaced, Asset will be substituted by the owner over and over again or will not be substituted, If the asset will not be substituted over and over again, will not be replaced over and over again, then the standard says that is like you specifically identifying the asset, and then the contract or the arrangement contains a lease, no problem. But if the owner of the asset is retaining the right of substitution, and those substitution rights are substantive, exercisable, because either he gets a benefit or he will get another concession, then the substitution rights are substantive, then the arrangement of the contract does not contain a lease. We will take some examples. Then right to obtain substantially all economic benefits, and this is where you need to be careful. Lot of people have lot of misunderstanding and misconceptions over there. Why? Now say you want a vehicle just for one day. Say Saman and Samanmali will get married and they want to have a vehicle for their chariot. So they will take a limousine car, Mercedes, from Malki Rent-A-Car on their date of wedding. The vehicle is to arrive at 5 o'clock in the morning, and that is to depart at 9 o'clock in the evening. Now, the user should be able to obtain substantially all economic benefits, not over the entire lifespan of the vehicle, no. The user has to take substantially all economic benefits only within the specific period. And on this particular date, if the vehicle has been given to this couple of Saman and Samanmali, the owner of the vehicle, Malki Rent-A-Car, cannot direct the vehicle to another wedding couple, cannot. On the date of the wedding of Saman and Samanmali, the vehicle will be stationed in front of Galadari, where the wedding is held, and until 9 o'clock of the same day, no one else can make use of the vehicle. So within the stipulated time period, it is Saman and Samanmali who will make the best possible make use of the asset. Then within the stipulated period, who is taking almost all economic benefits of the asset? The user. So you need not to look at the entire lifespan to see whether the user in the agreement has been given the right of receiving all economic benefits substantially. No, that is not what it means. Whether you get all economic benefits within the scope specified. Sometimes you will get a vehicle under a lease. The owner says, you can run the vehicle only within the western province and you can't go out of western province. That's all right. So that is the defined parameters and specifications. You should be able to run as many miles and kilometers as you want within that specified geographical territory. No problem. Still you get substantially all economic benefits. And the owner of the vehicle might say, look here, for a month you can run the vehicle only up to 3000 kilometers. You can't run it beyond 3000 kilometers. If you run beyond 3000 kilometers, if I get to know that if you will be caught of driving the vehicle and using it for more than 3000 kilometers a month, we will take the vehicle back and the agreement will be cancelled off. No problem. If you can drive the vehicle within 3000 kilometers, specified parameters, specified scope, be within that, and then that is what has to be taken as economic benefits. You can get the maximum economic benefits within 3000 kilometers. So, what it says is not that the user of the vehicle, user of the asset has been given substantially all economic benefits of the vehicle or the asset. No. See whether you can get substantially all economic benefits within the specified scope. It can be within a specific geographical area, territory, or it can be within a specific mileage and so on and so forth. And then right to direct the use of the asset. As I said before, it is we who decide what it is used for, how it is used for. So, you need to raise two questions. How the asset should be used for, what the asset should be used for will be decided not by the owner but by the user. Then the user has the right to direct the use of the assets. So, those are the basics, and we will go into more details and examples now to impress on how to identify a lease. Lot of examples are there. We learn the concept of protective rights even in SLFRS 10. In deciding the control, protective rights are not taken into account. So, once again here the most important concept in this lease agreement is to see whether the user gets the right to control the use of the asset. In passing on the right to control the use of an asset, specified identified asset, there will be certain restrictions on use. The owner will be restricting the use of the asset for certain areas, for certain purposes. Now, those restrictions are called the protective rights of the owner of the asset. Protective rights. The protective rights are not taken into account, and let me explain that. Now, I will take a vehicle from someone on rent, and in the lease agreements, are there provisions and clauses preventing me from using the vehicle to transport explosives? And the owner has included that particular provision in the lease contract, not for the purpose of preventing me from controlling the use of the asset. No, the control has been given. But what makes the owner of the asset include that provision in the contract is to safeguard the asset, to protect the asset and protect the interest of the asset. If explosives are transported, so risky, and that is illegal, and the owner of the vehicle will be in a risk. And those protective rights do not mean that the user of the asset has not been given the right to control the use of the asset. So, you need not to look at it and say the vehicle has been given, or we have taken a building on rent, and then the owner of the building says you can't use the building for a mortuary. And why does the owner of the asset prevent us from using the building for a mortuary? Because he is loving the asset. He wants to safeguard, he wants to protect the asset. And just by including that protective rights clauses and provisions, he does not mean that he wants to prevent us from controlling the use of the asset. The control of the use of the asset has already been given. So, what makes him include that particular clause in the agreement is because he wants to protect the asset. So, protective rights are not taken into account. We will look at only the substantive rights, not the protective rights. Now, we will go to the examples. Example number 1, a contract between customer and a freight courier, a carrier, provides customer with the use of 10 rail cars of a particular type. The cars are owned by supplier. Customer determines when, where and which goods are to be transported using the cars. When the cars are not in use, they are kept at customer's premises. Customer can use the cars for another purpose, for example storage, if it so chooses. However, the contract specifies that customer cannot transport particular type of cargo, for example explosives. If a particular car needs to be serviced or repaired, the supplier is required to substitute a car of the same type, otherwise and other than on default by customer, supplier cannot retrieve the cars during the 5-year period. So, that is it, and let us see how we can analyze that into the concept of identifying a lease. Now, the question explicitly says clearly the contract specifies the rail cars. These are the rail compartments. You have seen the compartments for yourself. The rail cars are specified. The owner cannot send whatever he wants, and these rail cars are specified right at the time of entering into the contract. Right. The cars are owned by the supplier, no problem. Customer determines when, where and which goods are to be transported using the cars. Customer can decide when to transport goods, how to transport goods and where to transport goods, meaning the customer has the right to direct the use of the asset, because the customer can decide for how and for what purpose the rail car should be used for. And they are kept at customer's premises. As long as the agreement continues, the vehicles of the rail cars are kept at the captivity of the customers. And then if the vehicles of the rail cars are kept at the premises of the customers, as long as the lease agreement continues, can anyone else use these compartments of the rail cars or cannot use? Cannot use. Why? They are under the control of the customer. So, what does it say? Within the specified lease period, it is the customer who will obtain substantially all economic benefits of the vehicle. How do we know that? Because during this specific period of the lease, these rail cars are kept at the premises of the customers. So, the customer receive all economic benefits during the specified period. Then, customer can decide even to use the rail cars for storage facilities if the goods are not transported. Once again, that confirms the fact that the customer has the right to direct the use of the asset. But there are certain provisions which will prevent and which will prohibit the customer from transporting goods. What kind of goods are prohibited from being transported? Examples, explosives, and that preventive clauses and the provisions will prevent the customer from controlling the use of the asset, or will not prevent. Why? This is what right? Protective rights. So, as I said before, protective rights need to be taken into account or need not to be taken into account. Need not to be taken into account at all in deciding whether there is a lease or not. So, the protective right, just forget. And if a particular car needs to be serviced or repaired, the supplier is required to substitute a car other of the same type, otherwise and other than on default by customer, supplier cannot retrieve the cars during the 5-year period. Now, as per the agreement, the rail cars given and made available for the use of the customer cannot be withdrawn, cannot be sent another one. So, what does it confirm? It confirms the fact that the vehicles, the rail cars given to the customer cannot be substituted. The owner does not have the right to substitute. But if the rail cars are required to be serviced or required to be maintained, I mean if maintenance are required, if services are required, and those are the specific instances under which the assets of the contract can be substituted, or if the customer default the payment again, the owner of the vehicle can retrieve them, can take them back, withdraw them back. So, other than those, no substitution rights ever given to the owner. So, things are very clear. There are no substantive substitution rights. The owner does not benefit from the right of substitutions. The customer gets substantially all economic benefits during the specified period. The customer can decide where to transport goods and how to transport goods and for what purpose the rail cars can be used for. What does it confirm? The contract has given the right to direct the use of the assets. So, all these requirements are completed and satisfied. So, no doubt, beyond doubt, we come to the conclusion that this agreement contains a lease no problem. So, those are highly judgmental. So, without understanding ins and out, you cannot do anything. So, we will go to the second example. The contract between customer and supplier requires to transport a specified quantity of goods by using a specified type of rail car in accordance with a stated timetable for a period of 5 years. The timetable and quantity of goods specified are equivalent to customer having the use of 10 rail cars of 5 years. The supplier provides the rail cars, driver and engine as part of the contract. The contract states that nature and quantity of the goods to be transported. Supplier has a large pool of similar cars that can be used to fulfill the requirements of the contract. Similarly, supplier can choose to use any one of a number of engines to fulfill each of customers' requests, and one engine can be used to transport not only customers' goods but also the goods of other customers. The cars and engines are stored at suppliers' premises when not being used to transport goods. So, things are very clear. So, let us put them into the format. Now, the similar story. A customer wants to transport goods and they take some rail cars from the owner. Along with the rail cars also they need to take the engine. It is a train, basically cargo train. And depending on the requirement of the customer, the owner, the supplier of the vehicles will decide how many rail cars to be sent. Now, taking into account the quantity of goods to be transported, the supplier decides that at least 10 rail cars should be made available to satisfy the requirements of this particular customer entity. And it is the supplier who decides the timetable. I made a mistake. It is the supplier who decides when to start and when to stop. So, the customer cannot decide when to start and when to stop. So, the customer has to get adjusted himself according to the supplier's timetable. And then, it seems that the supplier has a pool of rail cars and engines, and the supplier has retained the right of sending any rail car, any engine depending on the availability. So, based on these facts, you will realize that the assets in the agreement are identified or not identified. Not identified. Why? The seller or the supplier retaining the right of sending any engine or any rail car confirms the fact that the supplier has retained the substitution right, and those substitution rights are substantive. He can send any rail car, any engine. Why? Because the supplier will benefit from the substitution. So, now this particular requirement is not satisfied. What is it? There is no identified assets, specifically the assets are not identified. Then, according to the scheduled timetable, the train will start from a particular place and there will be a specific destination. So, in this journey, the supplier not only transports the goods of the specified customer, and the supplier can transport the goods of some other customers as well in the same train. So, what does it say? If you take the train for 12 hours, even within that 12 hours, this particular customer takes substantially all economic benefits, so does not receive. This particular customer does not receive substantially all economic benefits. Why? The supplier retains the right of transporting the goods of other customers as well. Then, supplier will be sending the driver, and the supplier will get the driver to direct the use of the asset. So, we can't decide how fast the train should be driven, how slowly it should be driven, and we can't decide when the train should start at and where it should stop at, what break it should take during the journey. It is not the customer who decides on those areas, it is the supplier who decides on this area. So, what does it say? The customer does not have the right to direct the use of the asset. So, now what is your conclusions? None of the requirements is satisfied, nothing is satisfied. So, this particular arrangement does not contain a lease. It is very clear, obvious. We will go to question number 3. The more questions you do, the more questions you practice, the better and easier it is for you to understand the concepts. We will go to question number 4. Question number 3, the business is bit awkward and you won't get the business. For you to get, understand the question, you should be able to understand the business. Question number 4, customer enters into a contract with a property owner to use retail unit A for 5-year period. Retail unit A is part of a larger retail space with many retail units. Customer is granted the right to use retail unit A. Supplier can require customer to relocate to another retail unit. In that case, supplier is required to provide customer with a retail unit of similar quantity, quality and specifications to retail unit A and to pay for customer's relocation cost. Supplier would benefit economically from relocating customer only if a major new tenant were to decide to occupy a large amount of retail space at a rate sufficiently favorable to cover the cost of relocating customer and other tenants in the retail space. However, although it is possible that those circumstances will arise at inception of the contract, it is not likely that those circumstances will arise. The contract requires customers to use retail unit A to operate its well known store brand to sell its goods during the hours that the larger retail space is open. Customer makes all of the decisions about the use of the retail unit during the period of use. For example, customer decides on the mix of goods sold, the unit pricing of the goods sold and the quantities of inventory held. Customer also controls physical access to the unit throughout the 5-year period. The contract requires customers to make fixed payments to suppliers as well as variable payments that are a percentage of sales from retail unit. A supplier provides cleaning and security services as well as advertising services as part of the contract. A lengthy discussion. So, we need to pick information from everywhere and to compile our decisions accordingly, and then we will draw to the conclusion. So, information scattered everywhere. Let us start from this identified asset. Now, if you read the question properly by picking the required informations and data, in this agreement, the owner of the building property has retained the right of substitution. The owner of the asset has the substitution right, but you need to look into whether the substitution rights are substantive, exercisable. The agreement says that the owner of the property can relocate the customer to another property, and before that the agreement says the customer has been given the right to use property A. Property A, what does it say? Asset is identified in the contract. Then we will get down to the subcomponents. And if the customer is to be relocated to another property, who has to bear up the relocation cost? It is not the customer who has to bear up the relocation cost. It is the supplier, the owner of the asset, who has to bear up the relocation cost now. Then relocation cost seems to be little expensive. It is not so easy as a result to relocate the customer. Now, what does it say? Even though the owner of the asset, supplier of the asset has retained the right of substitution, the substitution rights do not seem to be substantive. Why? Relocation cost is expensive and the supplier does not seem to be likely of exercising the substitution rights. Why? He has to bear up a cost. If the substitution rights are not substantive, what does it say? Replacing and substituting the existing asset is likely. Oh, unlikely. Substitution seems to be unlikely. And as a result, here the asset is considered to be specifically identified. Now, the seller, I made a mistake, the supplier or the owner of the asset does not seem to benefit from the substitution. No, he does not seem to benefit from substitution. He does not seem. There will be a cost of relocation. The substitution will cost to the supplier. So, no benefit from substitution to the supplier. So, as a result, what is your conclusion? Asset in the lease agreement or asset in the arrangement, asset in the agreement is specifically identified. Now, the lease term is 5 years. So, within the 5 years period, the customer can make use of the asset. the customer can make the best use of the asset within 5 years. And so what does it indicate? Customer will receive substantially all economic benefits within the stipulated time period of 5 years. And the question is very clear on facts, and you can read it once again for yourself if you want. Customer can decide what time to open up, what time to close the business, what goods to be sold, how many members of staffs to be kept in the premises, and what should be the mix of goods to be sold, and what prices the goods should be sold at. What does it say? The customer can decide how and for what purpose the asset should be used. And what does it say? The customer has been given the right to direct the use of the asset. So, it is very clear this particular contract or the arrangement includes a lease. We will go to question number 5. Customer enters into a contract with suppliers for the use of a truck for 1 week to transport cargo from New York to San Francisco. Supplier does not have substitution rights. Only cargo specified the supplier does not have substitution rights. Only cargo specified in the contract is permitted to be transported on this truck for the period of the contract. The contract specifies a maximum distance that the truck can be driven. Customer is able to choose the details of the journey, speed, route, rest, stops, etc. Within the parameters of the contract, customer does not have the right to continue using the truck after the specified trip is complete. Customer is responsible for driving the truck from New York to San Francisco. That is bit confusing and bit of a dilemma. So, do not panic and let us see how best we can conclude. Now, this is to take a vehicle, truck for the use of the customer, and for how long, what is the duration, let us see what the duration is. Now, in the second line of the paragraph it says, the supplier does not have the substitution rights. Where the supplier does not have substitution rights, then the assets are specifically identified in the asset. So, that part is clear. Only cargo specified in the contract is permitted to be transported on this truck for the period of the contract. The contract specifies a maximum distance that the truck can be driven. Customer is able to choose the details of the journey, right. The customer can decide how fast the vehicle should be driven and what routes to be used, what rest can be taken while during the journey, what the stop should be at. Now, the most importantly, at the end of the paragraph, the question says, customer is responsible for driving the truck from New York to San Francisco, and that is very important. If it is the customer who drives the vehicle, that is evidencing the fact that the customer has been given the right to direct the use of the asset. Now, also the question says it is the customer who decides how fast he can drive, how slowly he should drive, and what the stop should be at, what the rest should be taken during the journey. The customer has been given the right to direct the use of the asset. Now, within the given period, the starting point and the destinations are specified, what cargo should be transported have been specified, but during the same journey, can anyone else make use of the truck other than the customer? No one else can use of the truck other than the customer. So, during the specified period, during the specified activity, customer can obtain substantially all economic benefits. Then all the conditions and the requirements are fulfilled. So, no issue, this contract is containing a lease and things are very clear. So, you need to be intelligent to understand how best these requirements are satisfied, and do not panic, read carefully and then come to the conclusions based on that. We will move on to question number 6. A customer enters into a contract with a ship owner for the transportation of cargo from Colombo to Sydney on a specified ship. The ship is explicitly specified in the contract and supplier does not have the substitution rights. The cargo will occupy substantially all of the capacity of the ship. The contract specifies the cargo to be transported on the ship and the dates of pickup and delivery. Supplier operates and maintains the ship and is responsible for the safe passage of the cargo on board the ship. Customer is prohibited from hiring another operator of the ship or operating the ship if self during the term of the contract. Let me read that sentence again. Customer is prohibited from hiring another operator for the ship or operating the ship itself during the term of the contract. Explain whether the contract contains a lease. Right. Now, the question itself says that the supplier does not have substitution right. The ship is specifically identified in the contract. Then the customer, or rather the supplier, does not have the substitution rights. Okay. The supplier does not seem to benefit from the substitution. Okay. Right. So, that part is complete. Identify the asset. Now, the question says, when the cargo of the customer is loaded to the ship does not have any the ship does not have space to transport anyone else's cargo. Meaning what? During the specified journey, it is the customer's cargo that can be transported using the ship, and no one else's cargo can be transported using the same journey using the same ship now. So, that says that the customer obtains substantially all economic benefits. The cargo of the customer is loaded and the ship is full with the cargo of the customer, and they cannot, the ship cannot accommodate the cargo of anyone else's. What does it confirm? It confirms the fact that the ship can transport only the cargo of the customer and it does not have capacity, it cannot accommodate anyone else's cargo. So, it confirms the fact that customer receives and obtains substantially all economic benefits of the asset now. Then, customer is prohibited from using someone else's ship, and also the customer is prohibited from operating the ship on it, I mean the customer on his own cannot operate the ship. The conditions in the agreement are there that prevent the customer from directing the ship and operating the ship, meaning what? The customer has not been given the right to direct the use of the asset, and it is the supplier who decides where to start from. It is the supplier who decides what the destination should be. It is the supplier who decides what the stop should be during the journey, and it is the supplier who decides how fast it should sail, and all those are at the discretion of the supplier, not at the discretion of the customer. So, this part is not complete. If this part is not complete, that particular contract does not include a lease. Question number 7. And the same kind of a story, but contents can be different. Customer enters into a contract with suppliers for the use of a specified ship for a 5-year period. The ship is explicitly specified. Ship is explicitly specified. What does it say? The asset is identified in the contract, and supplier does not have substitution rights. No substitution rights. So, it is further strengthened the fact that the assets in the contract are identified. Customer decides what cargo will be transported and whether, when and to which ports the ship will sail. The customer has been given the discretionary power to decide what cargo to be transported, what the starting point should be, and what the destination should be, what the stops during the journey should be, and the discretionary powers are given to the customer. And the customer decides what cargo will be transported and whether, when and which ports the ship will sail throughout the 5-year period of use, subject to restrictions specified in the contract. Though restrictions prevent customer from sailing the ship into water at a higher risk of piracy of carrying hazardous materials as cargo. The supplier has prohibited the customer from sailing the ship into higher risk areas of piracy. You know what piracy means? And customer has been restricted and prohibited from using the ship to transport hazardous, maybe explosives, maybe illegal goods. And those rights that the supplier retains are the protective rights. And you know now, protective rights are taken account of or are not taken account of, are not taken account, just forget about them. Supplier operates and maintains the ship and is responsible for the safe passage of the cargo on board the ship. Customer is prohibited from hiring in another operator the ship of the contract or operating the ship itself during the term of the contract. Now, it is a bit confusing. Customer cannot operate on its own. It is true. And if the customer does not know how to operate a ship, might as well to keep your mouth shut and wait, but you can direct someone else to operate. You start at this point, it is my direction. You stop at this point, it is my direction. If I am not in a position, if I do not have the capacity and the capability of operating the asset, I just keep myself away from the operations, but I will direct the captain, look, yes, start the ship from this port, he has to do that, and sail it to this port, he has to do that, and you need to maintain this speed, he has to do that. I can direct the use, even though I can't use it on my own, even though I can't operate it on my own, I can direct the people, I can direct the captain, the use of the, I can get some people to operate by directing the use of the asset So, they can decide where to start from, where to stop, at what speed should be maintained. The customer has the right to direct the use of the asset. So, we have discussed couple of examples, may not be enough sometimes, but we need to move on and let us get on with the balance part of the standard. But this is the most important part, remember, because if you do not know how to identify a lease, the accounting part is a mess and that will go in haywire. Now, let us get on with the other important areas. Beginning of a lease. The starting point of a lease, and this is sometimes ambiguous. Why you can enter into a contract receiving the right of controlling the use of an asset today, but the supplier of the asset will make the assets available for the use on a later date. Say today, we will assume today is 1st January 2019. So, we entered into a contract on this date. On the date of the contract, supplier has agreed to make a building available for our use for 5 years period. But even at the time of entering into the contract, and we all of us knew that still the building was under construction. So, and after completing the construction, the building was made available for the use of the customer only on 1st July 2019 for 5 years period. So, what should be the starting point of the lease agreement? For you to do the accounting, you need to decide the starting point. Now, we learn two concepts here: commencement of the lease, and the inception of the lease. Inception of the lease, very simple, right? So, ladies and gentlemen, you all need to once again recall your memories of the definition of a lease. Asset should be specified, and the supplier should not keep the right of substitution. Even though he keeps the right of substitution, that should not be substantive. Supplier should not benefit from the right of the substitution, and the customer should be able to obtain substantially all economic benefits during the stipulated period, and customer should have the right to direct the use of the asset. So, those are the requirements now in the lease contract. Now, by 1st January 2019, you entered into the contract to get the right of use of the asset. But on that date, has the supplier specifically made the asset available for the use of the customer? No. The asset is specifically decided, and the supplier says, supplier will make available the property located at number 77 Mallasekara Mawatha, and the address specifically given, 7 stories building, and this is 25,000 square feet, everything specified on this date. But the building was made available for the use of the customer only on 1st July 19. Without the supplier making the building available for the use of the customer, can the customer obtain economic benefits. Without you having the physical access to the building, can you make use of the building? You cannot. Without the supplier making the building available for the use of the customer, customer cannot start obtaining economic benefits. And without you getting the physical access to the building, can you direct the use of the asset? The building is not available. Can you decide what time to open? The building is not available. Can you decide what time the building should be closed? Building is not available for the use. And can you decide what the building should be used for? Not. So, as a result, the requirements of the definition of the lease will be satisfied not on the date of 1st January 19, the date on which the agreement was entered into. The requirements of the lease are satisfied on this date of 1st July 19, the date on which the building was physically made available for the use of the customer, and that is considered to be the starting point of the lease. So, then 1st January 19 is considered to be the commencement of the lease. Commencement of the lease is 1st January 19. Both parties got together, they sat around the table, had some snacks, and they negotiated and entered into the contract, and there were some people to attest the agreement, lawyers were there. So, you agreed, but the building was not available for the use. That is called what? Commencement of the lease. What is the inception of the lease? Actual genuine starting point of the lease should be 1st July 19. You being the lessee should start recognizing the lease and accounting for the lease in the books not on 1st January 19, 1st July 19, that is the inception of the lease, 1st July 19, commencement of the lease, 1st January 9. So, what is important for us is not the commencement, what is important for us is the inception of the lease to decide the lease term. So, we can move on. Now, as you start doing the accounting for a lease, if you are the lessee, now I would have forgotten to explain those two concepts, lessor and the lessee. Lessor is the owner of the asset, the supplier. Who is the lessee? The user of the asset. Now, we need to do the accounting in the books of the lessee as well as the books of lessor. We will look at both aspects depending on the time availability. If you do the accounting in the books of the lessee, first and foremost you should decide what the lease term is, lease period is, and that is also not as easy as it sounds sometimes. Now, in the lease contract, can there be a non-cancelable period? There can be a non-cancelable period. So, that is taken as the basis. We entered into the lease contract on 1st January 19. The supplier could make the asset available for the use of the customer only on 1st July 19, and the non-cancellable period is 5 years. So, you start counting 5 years starting from which date? Not on 1st January 19. So, you should count 5 years starting from 1st July 19, that is the inception of the lease, not the commencement. So, you need to count non-cancellable period starting from the inception of the lease, not from the commencement of the lease. Important. What do you mean by non-cancellable period? One party cannot withdraw and terminate the contract unanimously on his own accord. Now, the supplier says halfway through down the line, I will cancel the lease agreement and I will take the building back. No, you cannot do that. Why non-cancellable? Unless the customer agrees for the termination of the contract unanimously on his own accord, the supplier cannot terminate the lease contract until 5 years expires. And the customer might say, look here, I have lost my interest to run the business. Now, this is like a sinking ship and it will never make profits. I want to shut down the damn business. You take the building back. Then the supplier will be in a problem. The customer can't do that. Why? It is a non-cancellable 5-year period. The customer cannot terminate the lease contract unless the supplier agrees unanimously. The customer cannot terminate the lease contract unless the supplier agrees. Non-cancellable 5 years. So, in deciding the lease term, you need to look at the inception of the lease contract and then you need to start counting non-cancellable period. Things are clear, I suppose. And along with this non-cancellable period, there can be option to extend to another period. Second, there can be an option. Sometimes option is given. After 3 years, if you want, you can terminate. Option to terminate the contract. Option to terminate the contract. Now, how will you decide? How will you decide the lease term? You take non-cancellable period. So, where should it start from? Non-cancellable period should commence from, not from the commencement of the lease. It has to start from the inception of the lease plus period of extension can be added. Provided the lessee is certain of exercising the option. Let me explain. Commencement of the lease 1st January 19. Inception of the lease is 1st July 19. Non-cancellable term is 5 years period. Apart from the customer being given the right of using that over 5 years time, also the customer has been given an option to extend the lease term for another 3 years period. It is an optional period. If the customer wants, he can continue to be in the building for another 3 years, or he can just vacate. Now, at the beginning, before you start doing the accounting for the lease contract, you need to decide the lease term. In deciding the lease term, you will not only take into account the non-cancellable period, also you need to take into account the optional period, and in coming to the conclusion, you need to assess how probable, how certain the lessee exercising this option to stay in the building for another 3 years. Taking the building for the example, you need to assess how certain the customer is in exercising the option to stay in the building for another 3 years. You need to make that assessment. Now say the customer has taken the building on lease to run his factory, right, and later on we got to know we are the lessee, and we have our main supplier within the close proximity of the factory building, and we can get the material supplied at a cheaper price because the supply is very close, within the close proximity of the factory building, taken on rent. Now you can make the assessment. The lessee exercising the option is certain or uncertain? Certain. If the lessee relocates its factory and then the transportation cost is high, and that will increase the manufacturing cost and that will bring down the profitability. So then there is an economic concession to the lessee for being in the factory all along. So the lessee exercising this option to extend the period by another 3 years time is very much certain. Then the lease term is not 5 years, it has to be altogether 8 years. What? Non-cancellable period starting from the inception of the lease, adjusted by the 3-year optional period. Why? The lessee exercising the option to stay in the building for another 3 years time is very much certain. Then lessee has also been given the option to terminate the contract in 4 years if he wants. Termination option has been given. So you should take that also into account in deciding and assessing the lease term. And you must take that into account when the lessee is very much uncertain of exercising the termination. And we know the lessee has found the biggest material supplier who is within the close proximity of the factory building. So the lessee exercising the option to terminate the lease contract just in 4 years time is certain or uncertain? Very much uncertain. So that period will be taken into account only when the lessee is very much uncertain of exercising that termination option, right. So there are 3 aspects to be taken into account. What are these 3 aspects? Non-cancellable should be the base, adjusted by the extension option. If the lessee is very much likely of exercising that option, then termination option, that is added to the non-cancellable period when the lessee is very much uncertain of exercising the termination options. I hope things are clear, so we can move on. So you can see some examples of factors to consider when making these assessments. I can't explain all of these factors, and you can go through, some of them are very clear. Contractual terms and conditions for the option period compared with the market rate, such as the amount of payments for the lease in any optional period, the amount of any variable payments for the lease or other contingent payments such as payment resulting from terminations, penalties and residual value guarantees, the terms and conditions of any options that are exercisable after initial option periods, significant leasehold improvements undertaken, costs relating to the termination of the lease, the importance of that underlying assets to the lessee's operations, conditionality associated with exercising the option. We can move on. Now, right away we can start the discussions of the accounting for a lease. Accounting for a lease, and this accounting should be discussed in two perspectives: in the books of the lessee and in the books of the lessor. In the books of the lessor. Now, this is the area where significant changes have occurred in SLFRS 16 compared to LK 17. Lot of changes. But this has not been revised. If you have done the accounting for a lease in the books of the lessor and LK 17, so the same stuff has been brought into SLFRS 16 as well, but it does not mean that we will just omit this part, we will discuss this part as well. Now, let us look at first the books of the lessee, how the lessee recognizes a lease agreement in the books of the lessee. Now, that again is of two types. There can be leases of short term and leases of low values, and then other leases. Now, the leases for a short term are the leases entered for a 1 year period or lesser than 1 year period. And if somebody enters into a lease contract for a maximum of 1 year term or lesser than 1 year term, and that is what is called as short term leases. Leases of low values, and that is bit of a subjective concept. Nowhere does the standard specify what the low values are, and that depends from organization to organization. If a business that has just 150,000 total assets value and an entity can enter into a lease contract even to buy a puncture machine under a lease contract, come on, that is not a low value compared to the total assets base. But if a business whose total assets value is 1 billion, sometimes entering into a contract to purchase an asset with a value of 5 million rupees will be of low value. So, it is a subjective concept, and that varies from organization to organization, that is up to the judgment of the business. But if an entity enters into a lease contract for a 1 year term or lesser than 1 year term, so ladies and gentlemen, that is of this particular category, and we need to discuss separately how these kinds of leases are dealt in the standard, and let me discuss that at the end, and that is not the hardest part. Other leases, what do you mean by other leases? That is not the game, a particular name has not been given as such. Leases where the lease term is more than 1 year's time, or the leases where the values of a significant amount, bigger values, values of a magnitude, of such a magnitude that are worth being considered to be big leases. And these are the hardest part. So, this is what that deserves our prior discussion, and then we will move on to the discussions of how short term and leases of small values are dealt in the standard. Right. Now, SLFRS 16 requires to recognize asset and the lease liability. And I just want to clarify this matter, why people are making blunders here. Just imagine we entering into a contract on 1st January 19 to use a building over 10 years time. And even the building was made available for the use of the lessee on the same date. So, the commencement is 1st January, inception is also 1st January, and what do we need to look at? It is not the commencement, we need to look at the inception. Non-cancellable is 10 years, no options to extend, no options to terminate. 10 years non-cancellable period. Then under LK 17 they made a blunder. Why? LK 17 recommended building being recognized into the books of the lessee. That was wrong, and that mistake has now been corrected in SLFRA 16. For you to recognize the building as an asset into the books of the lessee, you would have purchased the building on your own. If you purchased the building on your own, you would have received the control over the asset, and then you can decide on the building, not on the use of the building. If you want to set fire and burn that into ashes, you can do. Why? We have received the control over the asset. But under a lease contract, does the lessee ever receive the control over the asset? Not at all, it is a nightmare. The lessee receives only the control over the use of the asset. Then, if the standard recommends the asset, underlying asset being recognized into the books of the lessee, that can be the biggest blunder that any accountant can ever make in their lifetime. Why? That is like you showing as if you have purchased the asset. That is like you being given the right to decide anything on the asset. Are you given the right to do anything on the asset? No, it is not a purchase, it is not your, you can't control the asset, you can control only the right of use. So, if you decide to show the building in the balance sheet of the lessee, that is the biggest mistake that anybody can ever make in life. And we made that mistake in LK 70. You cannot show the building. What is our asset? Our asset in the books of the lessee is not the underlying asset. So, what is the asset? Our asset is only the right to use. You can decide and you were given the control only over the asset. So, what asset are we going to show? It is not the underlying asset that should be shown in the balance sheet. So, what asset should we show in the balance sheet? The right given to the lessee. And that is a very good recommendations by improvement in SLFRA 16 without the underlying asset being shown. What does the lessee recognize as an asset? It is the right to use the asset. So, you can take a building on lease, you can take a vehicle on lease, you can take machines on lease, but we are not going to show the underlying buildings, underlying vehicles, underlying machines. In common, what asset are we going to show in the balance sheet? That is an asset called right of use of the asset, right of use. Abbreviated form is ROU, right of use asset. So, irrespective of the nature and the category of assets you acquired under the lease agreement, the common name given for all the assets under SLFRA 16 is what? Right of use asset. So, you need to recognize what asset, not the underlying asset. If you recognize the underlying asset, you make the blunder. And what asset do we ever recognize now? Right of use asset. And also you need to recognize correspondent lease liability. Why? The payment for the right of use of the asset is not done at once at the inception of the lease, and that will be scattered in multiple numbers of payments over the entire lease term. So, as a result, until you settle the agreed value to be settled to the owner of the asset for the use of the asset, you should recognize that as a liability. So, if it is not a short term lease or a lease of a small value, everywhere else the lessee should recognize right of use asset plus the correspondent lease liability. How do we assess the lease right of use asset and the lease liability? First, you need to decide the lease liability. Let me take a simple example. On 1st January 19, APLC entered into a lease contract to take a building on lease for 5 years. Non-cancellable is 5 years, no options to extend or terminate, and lease rentals are payable annually in arrears. What does it say? At the end of each year, and the rental is 263,797.48. This is where we are. So, you need to prepare a balance sheet on 1st January 19. So, you need to first decide the lease liability, and you also need to look at the conceptual framework. What is a liability? A liability is a present obligation to transfer economic resources arising as a result of a past event. Present obligation, these payments are the present values of the settlements of the future values. Just adding the 5 installments together and say, you can't say this is the value of my liability, no, that is wrong. Then in order for us to calculate the present value of the liability, you need to take the installments over 5 years time, and you can't go on discounting 5 payments by 5 times, and that is childish and primitive, and you can't afford to lose time for small calculations at the exam. What you can do is instead take the value of a rent and multiply it by the annuity factor. Let me assume the interest rate to be 10%, 1 minus 1 plus r to the power minus 5 divided by r will give you the annuity factor into the rental. So, the present value of my liability will be 1 million rupees. This is the value of your liability in terms of present values, and you can debit to ROU irrespective of what asset you have taken on lease. This is the asset to be recognized. Debit to ROU by 1 million, credit where we will credit to lease liability by 1 million rupees. So, as I said before, you should simultaneously determine ROU asset plus lease liability. Of these two, which one should be first determined? You should first determine the lease liability. Here the present value is 1 million, debited ROU and credited lease liability. But sometimes, not it's almost always, determining even the present value of the lease liability will not be as simple as this. Lot of items need to be taken together. There are some items to be added, to be deducted, and then first you determine the lease liability, and then only you decide the right of use asset. So, always remember, you need to work out the present value of the liability, and then only you move on to calculate and decide the right of use asset. And let us see how the calculations are done with lot of examples. And we will discuss those calculations and initial measurement of ROU, initial measurement of liability, subsequent measurement of ROU asset, and subsequent measurement of the liability, and the contents of the payment, fixed, variable, option payments, guarantee residual value, they all will be discussed, and modifications and including variable payments and sale and lease back transactions, and also the books of accounting for leases in the books of the lessor. All these will be coming up in the second session of this video SLFRS 16. So, we will hope to meet you again with the second session.